River.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to take this opportunity to take a personal moment. Today is my granddaughter Kwastanaya's birthday, and I'm not there with her today, so I would like to wish her a very happy birthday and let her know that even though I'm not with her on her special day, that her chichia loves her very much. Thank you for your indulgence. I'm honored to rise today in this House to speak on Motion 102. This motion aims to adopt regulations on formaldehyde emissions and to model these regulations off the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency's regulatory standards. While we have been made aware of the toxic effects of formaldehyde for decades, countless governments have failed to take action by ensuring that regulations are being enforced. I believe that passing this motion and strengthening Canada's enforcement of formaldehyde emissions will not only serve to benefit Canadian industry, but will protect the health and safety of Canadians. Formaldehyde is a colorless gas that is emitted mainly from household products and building materials. It can be present in homes as a result of fumes from household products or building materials used in the home. In Canada, the presence of formaldehyde in the air poses a particularly dangerous risk as Canadians spend the majority of their times indoors, especially during the winter months. Although there is formaldehyde emissions standard for composite and hardwood plywood panels, it is simply a guideline with a voluntary compliance. It is not enforced by Health Canada, and this is putting Canadians at risk. The health impacts of exposure to formaldehyde emissions are significant. Formaldehyde is an irritant, and the concentrations of the gas can cause respiratory problems, burning sensations in the eyes and the throat, and in instances of high exposure can even cause cancer. Those with asthma and children are most likely to become sick after exposure of formaldehyde. For these reasons, formaldehyde was declared to be toxic in the Canadian Environmental Protection Act of 1999. Despite this, formaldehyde can still be found in composite panels made of recycled wood. These panels have many uses, such as the construction of furniture, shelving, cabinets, floors, and, Mr. Speaker, even toys. It is important to note that Health Canada has in fact established guidelines for indoor air quality, but the regulations on formaldehyde emissions fall short. As I previously mentioned, Health Canada does specify a formaldehyde emission standard for wood composites. However, this is a voluntary standard, a favorite method of regulation by both Conservative and Liberal governments in the past. It is senseless to have standards for formaldehyde emissions unless they are made mandatory. Voluntary guidelines have put Canadians at risk for far too long. We need a firm commitment from the government that the health and safety of Canadians will be their top priority. I believe that Canada needs to take its cue from our closest partner, the United States, and finally enforce strict regulations. After Hurricane Katrina destroyed the homes of thousands of families in Louisiana, many people were temporarily housed in homes, mobile homes, and trailers. These temporary homes were constructed using composite wood, and numerous people living in these trailers became very ill from the formaldehyde content. This resulted in several lawsuits over many years as victims sought repatriation for the damage done to their health. In response to these events, the United States government introduced stringent regulations in order to eliminate formaldehyde from composite wood products in 2016. These products include everything from countertops and cabinets to flooring and plywood. In December of this year, these regulations will be fully implemented in the United States. Any foreign or domestic manufacturers that want to sell or produce wood composite products containing formaldehyde will have to comply with these new regulations in only a few months. It is also important to note that California has adopted particularly strict measures using a phase-out approach to reduce public exposure to formaldehyde. These regulations require that any composite wood contained in flooring products be certified as having been manufactured using compliant wood products during production. Of course, it is important to think about the impact that strict regulations may have on Canadian businesses. There are currently 13 factories in 6 provinces that produce composite panels. Many of these factories are in rural communities, like the one I represent, and their communities depend on the economic benefits they bring to the region. These factories employ 11,500 workers and have an impact of approximately $3.4 billion for the Canadian economy. For my riding in particular, the forestry and lumber industries are key to sustaining a strong local economy. In February, we heard from members of this House that particle panel manufacturers in their ridings would directly benefit if this motion passes. If Canada does not harmonize their regulatory standards with those in the U.S., there will likely be a number of consequences in relation to profits and competition. As a result, we have already seen Canadian companies adopting stricter standards. Many Canadian manufacturers have adjusted their practices to comply with the regulations introduced in the United States in order to keep exporting their products across the border. Given that just over 70% of Canada's raw panels are exported to the U.S., many Canadian companies have already changed their production standards to meet American regulations. Canadian manufacturers would be at a significant disadvantage by not adhering to these strict rules because it allows them to remain competitive. I am confident that these new regulations will be a great asset, not a hindrance, to our lumber producers and will only serve to strengthen our local economies. Since this motion was first presented in the House, I have been pleased to see that many of us on both sides of the aisle will be supporting M-102. We believe that this government has a mandatory duty under the Canadian Environmental Protection Act to take action where significant health risks are posing a threat to Canadians. Health officials are well aware of the dangerous risks associated with formaldehyde, and it is time for the government to take leadership and protect the lives and well-being of Canadians. Voluntary standards are not good enough, and we need to pass this motion in order to ensure that regulations for formaldehyde emissions will now be fully enforced. We also need to ensure that our Canadian industries remain profitable and competitive with our American counterparts. And I believe that this motion will do just that. This is why I wholeheartedly support M-102 and strongly encourage all of you to do the same. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.